Are you ready to get started?
I'm ready whenever you're ready.
All right. Please welcome our speaker tonight, Dr. Juan Anciso. He is a professor and extension specialist, extension vegetable specialist with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service, and he's an excellent speaker. And I think you'll be well entertained with what he has to present to you with the excellent information. Take it away, Dr. Anciso.
Thank you, Kevin. Well, good evening, everyone. I guess today's y'all's vegetable gardening training. We're scheduled for 2 hours. Normally, this presentation takes me 3 hours. And so I'll probably be cutting out the warm season vegetables, but I will be covering the cool season vegetables, which are the vegetables you should be planting at this time when the weather is cool. There's my contact information, my email, and telephone number. But of course, if you ever have any questions, contact your agent there, Kevin, and he can get with me. So with that, we'll begin. Basically, there's of course been a lot of interest in growing vegetables in South Texas. I'd say over the last 20 years, but the previous 20 years, maybe not so much. And part of that reason of the increased interest in growing vegetables has been there's the growth of farmers markets, meaning that now you can have, we'll say a garden or small acreage area, a half acre, and you can actually sell or market directly to the consumer and actually make some money. Remember when I had my gardens in the 90s, pretty much I had, and some things would produce a lot. So I'd have a lot to give away, nothing to sell. So a big driving thing or the interest has been, being able to sell, particularly in farmers markets, your product. Another reason that's really grown or reason we see people having interest in vegetable gardens is they can apply the types of pesticides to control the many different pests that we get in Texas. And they can choose whether they want to use organic treatments, organic methods versus man made synthetic products. So that's a reason many folks decide to have a garden because they want to have, in most cases, organic type system that they're applying organic products, organic treatments. I'm not going to go so much into certified organic. I know we have an organic specialist that pretty much tells me what I talk about is not, and I don't want to say not correct, but not appropriate for certified organic, and that's true. So there is a certification. So when you go to the store, you able to buy organic produce, but that produce has to go through a certification. So it's not just someone saying that it's organic. So, but for the home gardener that's consuming it themselves, it's not a, big issue. It's only when you're trying to sell it into commerce. You could grow your product organically, meaning that you're doing every method. If you did decide to sell it at a farmer's market, you could not call it organic because it's not certified. So the certification really came into place because people were making all kinds of claims. And so, of course, the federal government stepped in with the USDA and developed organic standards. Another reason people may want to grow a garden or have a small acreage area is because they do want to grow what I'll call these heirloom or old timey varieties, varieties that you may recall from your youth. For example, for myself, yellow watermelons. There was a time you could never buy a yellow watermelon at any of the retail stores to eat. So when I was younger, you could, but now they seem to be making a comeback. Of course, tomatoes are probably the most famous of the heirloom or old timey varieties that people want to grow. Many different varieties there, but just you have a choice to grow those heirloom varieties or some current varieties that basically I'll be making recommendations of which varieties to grow in your garden. And of course, the pandemic hit, and we knew actually in that year in 2020, when I guess the shutdown began in March, a lot of people, I would say, maybe panicked and rushed and bought vegetable seeds, because I try to order seeds later in the year from these vegetable seed vendors, and they were pretty much all sold out. That was not the case in 2021 or now, but in 2020 that was very much the case, that a lot of the vegetable seed was gone because people, I'd say, panicked, had their gardens, have vegetables to eat. But we also learned through the pandemic and many studies that having a garden, and many people got interested in gardening, that it was good for their mental and physical exercise. Of course, those are things we already knew, but they were certainly more studied and more identified. So, we can really say that it's, if during that time, and we know that having a garden is good for you mentally and physically. So as master gardeners, you all should have your handbook, and most of the information I'll be discussing will come from chapter 10. So that can be your guide as far as if you want to thumb through the pages. And some of the general guidelines that we have uh, in having a garden is basically what I call these rules of thumbs. I guess the first rule of thumb is to select and plant recommended varieties for your area. That's very important because a lot of people may come from a different part of the country. They're used to their varieties, and they may find that those varieties do not do or do not produce as well as back in their home place. So it is very important to know what those recommended varieties are for your area. I'll be discussing varieties when we get to the vegetables section. And of course, as master gardeners, I think y'all have a list from your agent there as to what varieties are recommended for your Nueces County region. Of course, second rule of thumb is to plant at the right time. I will definitely cover that as we go through the presentation, but the generally is you want to plant cool season vegetables when it's cool and warm season vegetables when it's warm. And I divide that up in that manner so people, or you as master gardeners, understand that some plants prefer cool weather and not all plants prefer warm weather. So there is a appropriate time to plant these vegetables. Of course, the other rule of thumb is you have to prepare your soil, whether you make it yourself, so if you're doing a raised bed, or if you're going into your natural soil, you got to prepare it. There's going to be fertility or fertilization that's going to be important. I'm not going to cover the specifics of fertilization, but just some of the general principles that you should know as a master gardener. Of course, down here, controlling the weeds, diseases, and insects is pretty much paramount, meaning that if you have a garden in Nueces County, South Texas, you're going to battle these three pests tremendously. So you do want to control them and know what is your best methods of managing your pest in your garden. You also want to have adequate soil moisture, and that's basically understanding the water needs of the different vegetables. I will cover a little bit of that. And then for some vegetables, there is a right time to harvest. So it's not just any time. So I'll cover that a little bit. So these are what I consider the general rules of thumb. They're all encompassing, meaning, they can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. But in the end, I think if you approach your gardening with these principles and understanding them, you'll have success. So first we'll start off with site selection, and that's on page 193 of your handbook. And in that handbook, it'll tell you got to locate this garden or your little small acreage area where at least has 8 hours of sunlight, direct sunlight. So that means not planting your vegetable garden near a building, under a tree, or near large trees that may be blocking that sunlight for a large portion of the day. Uh, Generally speaking, if you can just get away from those areas, you're going to have more than 8 hours of sunlight. Soil, again, whether it's a raised bed or your natural soil, you have to understand what good drainage is. And there's basically two parts. There's internal drainage and external drainage. And the internal drainage is how the water moves through that soil profile. And external drainage is how that water moves basically around your plants, your vegetable plants. And the best example I can maybe illustrate that with is the reason growers, or when you go driving down the highway or the road, you see the growers uh, with the rows or the beds, and they're slightly raised. And the purpose of that is to provide external drainage for the most part. In a scenario where you have a rain event and it's at least able to move that water away from the roots. Obviously, if it's a low spot, it's going to be inundated and be problematic. But even farmers understand the importance of drainage. And of course, that's external. And I'll go through some internal drainage examples. Again, that site has to be free of competition, meaning weeds and trees. And you'll be, even if you have a raised bed and it's basically touching the soil or the ground, those trees, those roots go way beyond the drip line of that tree and actually can rob the nutrients and water from your garden area. So you don't want vegetables as a whole are very poor competitors, meaning they're not going to be able to take away the water and the nutrition, even from weeds. So if your garden is very weedy, and you're watering it and fertilizing it, really the only thing taking those nutrients is the weeds. Therefore, those vegetables are stunted, don't grow well, because they're just not good competitors. And of course, you want to have access to good quality water. And that's basically where I'll begin, because understanding the water and your soil is first and foremost in being successful in your garden. So for water sources, obviously most people living in the city will have access to city or municipal water. The only drawback to that is that we know that the city water can be quite costly, meaning it's relatively expensive in comparison to well water or canal or surface water. So one way that you might manage that cost is to install drip irrigation, because we do know through drip irrigation we can save anywhere from 40 to 60% of the water in comparison to a sprinkler system or a flood irrigation type system. Sprinkler would be just your sprinkler sprinkling the garden. Flood irrigation would mean just placing your water hose out there and letting it run. So in comparison to that, this drip irrigation system would save you about half the water. Now, drip irrigation can be a little intimidating at first, but I would say once you understand it, it is really simple to use and very efficient, and something that I highly recommend folks to use in their vegetable garden. Now, some people may live out in the country or may not have access to city water. Then they probably maybe utilizing a well or water that's coming from below ground, some type of aquifer that's below ground. Normally in South Texas, many of the wells or aquifers below us are very salty. They have a high salinity content. That's just not only sodium chloride, but many other salts, and that can be problematic for your vegetable garden. So if you are using well water to irrigate your vegetables, it would be very important that you submit a water sample to a laboratory. Texas A&M has one to see the level of salinity in that water. And generally, we use these numbers or thresholds. If the threshold is below 1,400 parts per million salinity, the water is good to use for vegetables. If it's between 1,400 to 2,100 parts per million, that could be, that's what I'd call a gray area or cautionary area. Some folks might be successful and do okay, but others may have problems. So that kind of falls into a gray area, meaning that, it could be problematic and for some folks and not others. But certainly if your water report comes back above 2,100 parts per million, that is too high for all these vegetables that we're going to be talking about. So if I saw that water report and you're using well water, I would recommend not to grow vegetables. That is too salty for vegetables. So we have at least some guidelines or criteria to say, how salty the water is and to use. Now, if you're using canal or surface water, well, some people may have it, some may not. Again, it'd be important to know the salinity in that water. And again, it'd be the similar numbers. Generally speaking, canal and surface waters run typically below that 1,400 part per million salinity. In most cases, that's not to say it happens all the time. So oftentimes canals or ponds and I don't want to say lakes can be used to irrigate your crops. For us in the Rio Grande Valley, we use the Rio Grande River to irrigate our crops and to actually drink from the water fountain. And just to give you kind of like a perspective, generally that Rio Grande River runs 800 to about 1,100 parts per million total salts. Occasionally, it can run up to 1,700, but most of the time, it's running well below the 1,400 parts per million criteria that's okay to grow vegetables. So when you do submit a water sample to a laboratory, you're not going to get these parts per million that I've been discussing, 1,400, 1,400 to 2,100. You're going to be getting these values that we call EC or electrical conductivity. And they basically, what the laboratory is doing is running an electrical current in that water, and they measuring the electrical current. And that current basically can be used to translate or estimate the salinity. So if you send it off, and normally the multiplier that we use is 700. So if you send it off to the lab and it comes back, you're not going to see parts per million. You're going to see maybe, for example, class 1 excellent up to 0.25 EC. So if you multiplied the 0.25 times 700, you would get 175 parts per million total salts. Class 2 would basically be 0.25 to 0.75. You convert that to parts per million, that'd be 175 to 525 parts per million. And just so you know that your drinking water that you drink from a water fountain must be, the federal government inspects the municipalities, and it must be below 500. So water with a salinity of less than 500 parts per million is considered excellent, good, and meaning that human beings can drink it. So human beings can drink it. It's certainly great for the vegetables. But vegetables or plants, or the plants that we'll be discussing, can tolerate a little more salinity than humans can. So that'd be class 3 or permissible water, and that runs from 0.75 to 2 EC. You convert that, for example, multiply the 2 times 700. So that's where you get the cutoff range of 1400. So a value of 2 EC and below is good for vegetables. A value of 2 to 3 EC can be doubtful. That's where you're in the 1400 to 2100 part per million range for that water. Again, in some cases it's okay, some cases it's not. I have to kind of really evaluate the situation to say that that water's okay. But certainly if the report comes greater than 3 EC, then it's above 2100s. And I would say there's no point in trying to grow vegetables or utilizing that water to grow these vegetables. And that's in chapter 7. That's another slide, same slide. So that's salinity. So I don't want to bog you down too much with salinity, because there's also, I guess, classifications. And you can look this up on the internet. There's a lot of resources that can tell you. But basically, they've done studies with, all the vegetables, cabbage, celery, sweet corn, cucumbers, onions, peppers, you name it. They've done it all, and they've basically come up with a value. So if you look at the for salt, the column of salt, you see that onion has S, and that S basically stands for sensitive. So onions are very sensitive to salinity. So their values are much lower than other vegetables. So one of the first vegetables, if you're having salt issues, are onions and peppers, even though it might have moderately sensitive on peppers. Those are going to be two vegetable plants that have problems with salinity. Now, some of the ones that tolerate the most salinity are beets, Swiss chard, spinach, tomatoes. They can tolerate a higher level of salinity. So sometimes when you have a garden and you plant different vegetables and you planted some beets and they're the only thing that lived and it's growing well, and can pretty much assure you that you have salinity issues that took out the other vegetables. But beets, spinach, and Swiss chard, even tomatoes could tolerate that salinity that it encountered. Now, not to confuse things, there is another element besides salinity that does not go with salinity, and that's boron. Onions, again, are very sensitive to boron. If there's high boron concentrations in the water, it can kill the onions. Tomatoes are very tolerant to it. But I can give you an example of citrus trees. If the water is even not too high in boron, it can actually kill a citrus tree. So again, the different requirements are there. We pretty much focus on salinity. If that didn't answer our questions, then we might turn and try to see if there were some boron related issues in growing those vegetables in your garden. So that's the water quality in terms of salinity. Now we're going to talk about their overall water requirements. And that can be what some folks might call hydrozoning. In other words, putting vegetables in their zones based on their water requirements. So if we look at cabbage, you can see it requires 20 to 30 inches per acre. And those are actual 20 to 30 inches as you'd measure from the ground up. But I don't want you to know, I guess as master gardeners, I don't want you to get caught up that if this is a value given on a per acre basis. But I want you to understand from this particular slide is that some vegetables require a whole lot more water than other vegetables. So when, for example, celery requires 30 to 35 inches of water to basically grow that celery plant to its full potential. Now, if we were to look at spinach on that same slide, spinach only requires 10 to 15 inches per acre. Now, some people might view celery as a leafy green, spinach as a leafy green, so they may plant it alongside in a garden. However, they would probably water it the same. They'll water that celery the same as that spinach. So, depending on their watering habits, one might get too little water and one might get too much. So, you do want to maybe group, for example, in this case, we're talking about the leafy greens. You might have a celery row where you actually apply extra water in comparison to the spinach. And maybe that cabbage would be somewhere near what you'd water that celery, but a whole lot more than the spinach as well. So it is really just trying to understand the watering needs of the different vegetables. And so people, they want to plant all different things. They want their garden to look pretty. So you might have a mixture, but you don't realize that there's different water requirements. Again, these water requirements can be found on the internet, on various resources. But as master gardeners, I just want you to think about that, they all don't require the same. You look at watermelon there on the slide, 10 to 15 inches to basically grow that watermelon crop. Again, for watermelons in a small garden scenario, they do need space, but their water requirements are much lower than cabbage, celery, sweet corn, cucumbers, peppers. It's just right there with spinach in terms not requiring very much water. So that's just how that plant behaves. Okay. So now I'll go through the different irrigation methods. The top right picture is basically a commercial picture showing a drip system. Basically, the water goes to that larger tube, then through smaller tubes. Again, that would be, for example, at your house, hooking it up to a water hose and somehow having the right attachments to place your drip system either on the soil or buried in the soil to grow your garden. And basically, you might think of it like a soaker hose, but it's not a soaker hose. But something like a soaker hose where the water is basically being applied at or near the roots, so you don't really have to water the entire bed or the entire area, and the plant is getting enough water. The bottom right picture is basically a flood or furrow irrigation. That would be just like you basically placing that water hose in your garden, turning it on, letting it water, accumulate, walk away for some time and see how you can totally water that area. It's a method of irrigation. I'm not here to basically say this is a bad irrigation, this is a good irrigation. I just want you to understand that there's different ways to basically irrigate your garden. And maybe furrow irrigation or flood irrigation makes the best sense for you, but just think about how drip could actually save you half that water. Of course, sprinkler, the bottom left picture is a commercial vegetable sprinkler system, sprinkling up spinach. And again, that'd be no different than you placing a sprinkler on your garden to sprinkle. People ask me, like, how much water savings do you get with a sprinkler relative to a furrow or flood? It's gonna be somewhere between that flood and that drip system. It's not gonna be as good as the drip system, but it's gonna be better than the flood type system in terms of water savings. So now we'll discuss drainage. And drainage, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, when you drive down the road and you see the rows, those are beds. And I have a picture there of a garden, the upper left-hand picture of bedded ground. So that ground has been bedded up in pretty large beds or rows. And it's basically doing the same thing as that raised bed picture on the right, where actually boards are taken and placed, and they've put some type of soil substrate to grow their vegetables there. So they're both acting the same when it comes to external drainage. In that picture of the bedded ground, you can see there's been a large rain event and it's flooded, but you see those plants basically up and their root systems are up above the water that's in the furrows, and that would be what you would expect from having a raised bed as well. So you're basically lifting the plants up off the ground. In comparison to being flat on the ground, that's a picture of my garden from the 1990s, where I just basically did not make any beds. I did everything with a shovel. I didn't have a tiller or anything like that. It's hard to make beds with a shovel, so I would plant things on the ground. Knowing that when I did have a big rain event, the water might accumulate in a corner there and basically drown out or kill my vegetables. But that was a price I was willing to pay so I wouldn't have to bed or try to make beds with a shovel. So I guess what I'm trying to say is there's many ways to approach your garden. Obviously, the best way is to have some bed or raised beds to provide external drainage, but that's not not I don't want to say it's not necessary. That's just the better way of approaching your garden. And more information can be found on page 198 of your handbook. Now we want to prepare the soil. Again, I prepared it by using a shovel, but you could have a tiller. If you have a small tractor and you're trying to do a quarter acre or a tenth of an acre, there are implements that can help you till and work the soil, basically soften the soil, make it in a manner that the vegetable roots can go down and actually grow instead of growing into something hard. Again, in the past, we do talk about running a soil test. And in the past, that's always been just to try to understand the fertility, how much fertility was there, the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And that's okay, and that's important to know. But now I like to include the salinity. Just like that water can be salty, your soil itself can be salty. You could even make salty soil or a salty media if you're going into a raised bed. So you do need to know how salty the soil is or the material that you've made for your raised bed, because that can also create problems for your vegetables. And I'll discuss that a little bit further as far as soil salinity. And of course, when preparing the soil, you try to incorporate as much organic matter as you can. In our soils in Texas and South Texas, the organic matter is basically gobbled up by the microbes, meaning that there's microorganisms that eat the organic matter and release the nutrients. And that basically happens when it rains and our warm temperatures or hot temperatures increase those microorganisms, so they basically can digest all the organic matter in relatively a few months in South Texas, provided it rains or you irrigate that area. So organic matter is basically gobbled up in the warm states of the United States. So we want to incorporate lots of organic matter, because the organic matter is also supporting microorganisms that help the plants grow, release nutrients the plants need that you may not be providing in their fertilizer. So you just get much better growth and response from vegetables when you do have a good amount of organic matter present. You can add compost, which can be a type of organic matter, but it's also known to improve drainage. So the compost or the organic matter can be considered like sponges. It's like throwing sponges from your kitchen into the soil, and those sponges are basically absorbing the excess water in the soil and then releasing it slowly as it's needed. So that can act in a way of some type of improving internal drainage on that particular garden plot. And of course, adding nutrients can be necessary and often necessary to have a successful garden. Now, if you're going to go into our natural soils, which is what I do, but many gardeners don't prefer to do that. And I guess my take home message there is all these soils that we have in South Texas can be considered soils you can grow crops in, grow these vegetables in. Don't get caught up too much in the old gardening books or any gardening book saying that you have to adjust your pH to slightly acidic, meaning below 7, to be successful. You can be successful with nearly all these vegetables. There are some vegetables that struggle with a pH of 8.3, which is alkaline. So I would say work with the pH that's already present in your soil. You will still be successful. So just know the pH, but don't get caught up that the pH is wrong and won't work. Another thing with pH in South Texas is that our soils, for the most part, are going to be calcareous, meaning they're high in calcium. That's also going to mean our soils are alkaline. They're going to be above 7, generally from 7.5 to 8.3 pH. Those soils are very hard to bring down their pH by adding acidifying agents like sulfur, like gypsum. Now, other parts of the country, they could have high pHs, but their soils are not calcareous, and they can add gypsum, they can add sulfur, and they can reduce the pH, but we can't do that in Texas because the soils are calcareous. They are also able to have a high buffering capacity, meaning for all the acid that you add, it's being gobbled up by the calcium and not being released or changed or allowed to change the pH of the soil. So that's pretty important because a lot of people, read gardening books, and I'm not saying you don't get a benefit from adding gypsum and sulfur to our alkaline soils. I'm just saying you don't change the soil pH. Our natural soils are also low in organic matter, generally less than 1%. You want to add organic matter to the soils. Our soils, for the most part, can be considered fertile type soils. And part of the reason they say they're fertile is because they're high in potassium and calcium. So that is a type of fertility that's important to vegetables and many plants. And another aspect is our soils tend to be on the loam side. That's clay loam to sandy loam. And a loam soil means a mixture of clay, silt, and sand. If it's a clay loam, it's going to have a percentage of clay that's going to be, I don't want to say higher than silt and sand, but enough clay to classify it as a clay loam. But clay, meaning it's the driving part of that mixture of soil. And a sandy loam is one that the sand component of the silt and clay dominates or drives that soil. Again, we want to have our soils to be mixed. We want them to be loamy or loam soils, or our soils already come that way. We don't want to grow our vegetables in pure sand. We don't want to grow our vegetables in pure clay. If you got those types of soils, you're going to have problems growing your vegetables. And more information can be found on chapter 5. Just briefly, you all might have already had someone talk about soils, but collecting soil for a soil test, needing a bucket, a pointy or sharpshooter shovel, your bags to collect your soil. This is just demonstrating that, I go out in an area, collect 10 samples. I usually try to take the tip of the soil from that shovel, meaning it's going to be probably in that 2 to 4 inch depth range, which is where the roots are going to begin, are going to grow, are going to suffer the most. Then I just kind of shake it around and try to fill that bucket, that bag up, so it's kind of random. So that's kind of the purpose there. Try to make your soil sample, even your soil sample from a raised bed, as random and as representative of the soil as you can possibly make it. Now I'll discuss the salinity levels in the soil. Just like water has certain numbers or thresholds, so do soils. Obviously, again, it's going to be measured by electrical current. They're not going to give you parts per million, but in this case, we're just going to stay with the electrical current values as to determine the salinity of that soil. So what I normally say, if we get an EC value on that soil being less than 1.6, it's going to be good or okay for vegetables. If we're in that 1.61 to 3.2 EC, again, sometimes you're okay, sometimes you're not. I'd say most of the times you're not. I would say in this range is where you're going to find beets, Swiss chard, spinach, and tomatoes to, thrive okay, maybe not great. So you might say, it's okay to grow, but some sensitive vegetables like onions and peppers are not going to grow at all in a EC with a soil with an EC of 1.6 to 3.2. Now, if you show me your soil report and it says it's greater than 3.2, I'd say forget it. You're just not going to grow vegetables. And I'll go through an example that happened in the real world. So again, so there are, as master gardeners, I don't want you to know the exact numbers. I just want you to know that there's levels of salinity that are okay and levels of salinity that are not okay, both for water and for soil. Okay. Then once you know that, then you can go back to the resources and send a water sample off, send the soil sample off to the laboratories to be evaluated, and you can make better decisions on what to do for your garden, or what to, if you're going to intend to have a garden. Now I'm going to go through a quick example of what happened in the past. So in the past, when we were recommending soil tests, the only values you would get would be what's in the yellow, okay? And that was just basically telling you the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium needs of the crop and what you should do for your garden. Now, in that same report that we, used to recommend and still is recommended, although I don't recommend it, is conductivity. And as I mentioned, conductivity is a type of measure, is a way to measure salinity. So we're going to go through this example of this 8-acre vineyard. Of course, the grower called me in October, not because the plants look great, they actually look terrible. And I suspected there was salinity issues. That particular year was a dry year. The leaf symptoms looked like salinity symptoms. So I wanted to make sure to check that box off. So his pH in his vineyard was 6.6, excellent pH. The conductivity was 248. It's measured a little different than the numbers I gave you, but it's basically giving you a qualitative value of saying that there's none, there's no salinity. So don't worry about salinity. Saying it needs 5 pounds of nitrogen per acre, everything else is fine. So it was pretty much a very well cared for vineyard in terms of its nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, not lacking those things. Now, if you look at the green gray area, that's the additional test that I often recommend to get back at seeing is there a salinity issue. Again, pH 6.6, the conductivity was 0.85. To go back to our chart, it's basically saying it's okay. There's no salinity. So in this case, that conductivity due to the detailed salinity test coincides with the what I'll call the regular soil test, where it's saying none, there's no salinity. So in this case, as an example, and then for this vineyard, this was not a salinity issue that was causing those grapevines to decline. It was actually viruses that was causing a problem for this particular individual. Now I'll go back and then I'll go to the next example. Here I had an organically certified onion grower. Of course, he didn't call me because the onions look great. He called me because the onions, there was basically a onion plant every 10 feet. And as an onion grower, you're not going to make any money. There's an onion plant every 10 feet. Okay. So again, looking at the regular soils test, pH in that particular field was 8.0, moderately alkaline, but not a problem for onions. Conductivity is 670. They're saying there's slight salinity. So in the past, when I had received a report like this, I would say slight salinity. Don't worry about it. There's no issues. There's this salinity is not causing a problem. Obviously, it did a very good job of putting out nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. That's basically the recommended. The recommendation was he did not need to put any more nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium to grow those onions at that point in time. But if you go down and look at the green gray area, which is the added detailed salinity test, you'll see the pH is a little different when they do that particular test, which I think is really the true pH in the soils, and that's why plants, many of these vegetable plants, do well in these soils. But if you look at the conductivity value of 3.96, and we go back to the table, you can see that that's way beyond the 3.2 threshold of value for salinity. So those onions were severely being affected by salinity. Had I only recommended to the grower to do the yellow test, the regular test, we probably would have been trying to find a seed company to sue and say they sold them some terrible seed that did not germinate very well. And in this case, that was not the case. In this case, it was salinity. Also, the grower kept some of the seed behind, and I did test the germination, and it was quite good, as good as the company said it was. So it was not a germination issue; it was a salinity issue. So it is important to understand salinity in your garden and your soil salinity and your water salinity in order to be successful. Here, this grower invested thousands of dollars planting those onions, and he actually created the fertilizer mix organically that made it extremely salty. So he was the culprit of it all. He made a very good fertilizer mix that basically contributed a lot of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, but also its contribution was also salinity to the soil. So discussing salinity, we want to know what is salinity. Obviously, we all know that common table salt is something that's salty, and that's designated by the sodium molecule Na and the chloride molecule. And you can see there's a plus and minus, so you can kind of think of it as like a magnet. The plus is attracted to the negative, and so the salts basically have these charges, a positive and a negative, that basically classifies them as salts. I'll move on to the next one, the NH4NO3. That's ammonium nitrate. That is a fertilizer, but as a fertilizer, it is also a salt. The next one is KNO3. That's potassium nitrate. And that is also a fertilizer, but it's also a salt. The next one is CaNO3. That's calcium nitrate, a fertilizer, but also a salt. The next one is CaSO4. That's calcium sulfate. The type of, plants need calcium. They also need sulfur. That would be considered, as an amendment that you'd want to give the plants, but it's also a salt. That is gypsum. That is actually gypsum calcium sulfate. Of course, the next one is MgSO4. That's magnesium sulfate, another amendment known as Epsom salts that plants can utilize and respond well, but it's also a salt. And the last one is NH4HPO4, ammonium phosphate, a very complex or a very important agricultural fertilizer that's used. As you can see, it's also a salt. So the salinity is in the soils and in the water is not only coming from sodium, Na, or chloride. So it can also be coming from all these other type of molecules that have these charges. So it's, so when we say total salinity for the soil and for the water sample, we're not only just talking about common table salt, we're talking about many other things, potassiums and calciums, and sulfates and nitrates that are contributing to the total salinity. So it's the plant doesn't distinguish, if it's just too salty, regardless of the source, it will just be too salty and the plant will suffer. Quickly, just on the fertility side, if you grind up ornamental plants, fruits, and vegetables, you get the percent nitrogen, percent phosphorus, percent potassium. Obviously, they require all three. If you look at that kind of generalized ratio, it's basically 3 parts nitrogen, 1 part phosphorus, 2 parts potassium. And that's generally how I try to approach my fertility program and my vegetables, providing, the right amount of nitrogen, but also phosphorus and potassium, but certainly not to the level of the nitrogen. And oftentimes I try to stick to that 3:1:2 ratio. And that's in chapter 6. So now we're getting to planting. So again, yes, if you're even a small gardener, people want to plant by hand. You can plant some things by hand, like sweet corn and beans, but other things like onions and carrots and that have or lettuce, that the seeds are really, really small. It's really hard to plant them by hand. There are things that, tools or mechanical devices you could use to help you with that. But I highly encourage, if you are going to plant different vegetables from seed, not from transplants, to invest in a push planter, meaning a planter you push and actually drops a seed, maybe not perfectly, but it does at least give you the ability to provide the appropriate spacing. That planter there in the picture, that push planter in the picture with that person, is about a $80, $90 push planter. I have a $600 push planter, and that I use to plant my vegetables for my trials, and I can come pretty close to what the growers do commercially with their high dollar vacuum planters that utilize a vacuum to basically pull the seeds exactly into each pore space and drop it exactly. So I think push planters are a good investment for a gardener. You can buy them as cheap as $80. Of course, they're not going to be as good as a $600 one, but they certainly will help you a lot. If you have a small acreage scenario where that's a lot of pushing a planter, there are planters that are available that you can attach to your small tractor, and again, plant your vegetables in a much better spacing. And both of these planters utilize gravity and a pore size, so they're not like what commercial vegetable growers use with vacuum type planters, air assist planters. They're using basically more tools to have a more precise planting of their vegetable seed. I won't go too much into IPM, but basically IPM, whether it's for insects, disease, or weeds, basically means you're providing the best care of your plant. That means basically fertility and culture, planting the most adapted or recommended varieties. If you are using organic or man-made products or chemicals, I always start off with what's the most environmentally friendly. Not all organic products are environmentally friendly. For example, sulfur can be organically certified. There is organically certified sulfur, but that can be one of the most least environmentally friendly products that would be available in organic scenario. So it's just again, you want to start off with the most environmentally friendly products first, then move up as you need them to control your pest. Of course, any chemical you apply, whether organic or man-made, use them properly, use them safely, treat them as chemicals like you treat your chemicals in your kitchen, meaning you don't want to get them on your hands, in your eyes, in your lungs, and always follow the label. And more information on chapter 13. That's just and even in a garden scenario, there's going to be other insects, for example, that you might see, and they're not all bad. Some of them are good because they actually go and eat the bad guys, or they lay an egg on the bad insect pests you might have, and devour it internally. So not all the insects you might see in your garden are bad. Again, there are some physical methods to prevent some insects. These are row covers. These are tomato plants on a very small raised bed. And they're using straw, basically, I would say in this case, to protect it from the cold. But they're using those row covers to protect it from the white flies and aphids. And some of these row covers can give you a little bit of cold protection. They can give you wind protection, and the right row covers can keep out many insects depending on the size of the pores. And you do want to use a row cover that allows 80 to 90% light penetration and doesn't shade the plants. So there are, I guess, physical methods, at least for some insects, and instead of spraying chemicals, that you can block the insect from getting to the plant. Soil-borne diseases. Again, that's just basically a picture of tomato roots that have been severely infested with a root knot nematode. So those are unhealthy tomato roots. In this case, you could solarize the soil, meaning heat up the soil. You can take clear plastic and basically put it in the summertime, and the sun's rays will go through the plastic, basically create a greenhouse effect and really warm the soil. So that would kill the nematodes. It will kill certain soil-borne fungi. There's other methods like L-bonds, cereal rise. So there's certain plants you could plant in your raised bed that you could uh, just in and of themselves suppress nematodes and certain soil-borne diseases, or they're actual, you turn them under green and the microbes decomposing the green matter basically end up killing or reducing the nematode population and the soil fungi population. So that was on disease control. Now I'm going to move on to weed control. And as master gardeners, I think this is one of the most important slides that I have in the presentation. And the reason I say that is because really organically, we're really limited in our in our weed control methods. There are no, or there are not very many uh, chemical organic methods to control weeds. The ones available kill everything. They kill the vegetable plant that you're trying to grow, and they kill the weed. So there's really there's no way to, I guess, utilize them in a manner where you're controlling the weed but leaving the plant alone. So this is where we really need man-made or synthetic herbicides. Now I'm talking about agriculture. This is not necessarily not your garden or your small acreage, but in agriculture, herbicide or weed control with herbicides is very critical. And this is an example that I show is basically you have cowpeas or purple hull peas on the left-hand side. And herbicide was applied when the cowpeas were planted. On the row on the right side is what we call the untreated area. That area also had cowpeas planted, but no herbicide was applied. So that weed, that sunflower looking weed, that daisy looking weed basically outgrew the the cowpeas or the purple hull peas and just dominated. So without that herbicide to control that weed on the left-hand side, uh, it would be difficult to go in there by hand, hoe it out, or at least cost effectively to and be productive. So in some ways, we do need man-made chemicals, especially when it comes to weed control for agriculture. As master gardeners, I want you to recognize that till we get to the point that we have better systems in place to control the weeds without using man-made chemicals. I mean, they're going to be very important for food production around the world. One way, besides using chemicals that you could use in your garden, is plastic mulch. There's plastic mulch. There's also biodegradable mulch. And basically, in these cases, you would have to either poke holes and place a seed or put your transplant. But those mulches, whether biodegradable or plastic, are basically creating an environment where it's suppressing any weed growth, whether it's grasses or broadleaf weeds, and your plant has, your vegetable plant doesn't have competition from weeds and they will grow well. So plastic mulch is uh, uh, really used, for example, in watermelon production, tomato production, to manage the weeds around those vegetable plants. It also helps with holding water, holding moisture, so it doesn't evaporate from the area, but it's primarily used for weed control. Now I'll begin with, I have about, I guess, close to an hour, but not quite an hour to talk about the cool season vegetables, which is probably the part that you all want to hear I was just laying the groundwork or the foundation of being successful in the garden. Meaning you got to understand your soil, got to understand your water, you got to understand your pest, manage your pest, uh, how you're going to plant your vegetables. All these things are going to be critical to being successful with your garden. Now we can talk about the actual vegetables themselves. Again, as I mentioned, cool season vegetables uh, like uh, like it when it's cool. And in Texas, that's basically from Labor Day to Valentine's Day. So this would be the time you'd want to plant either by seed or by transplants many of the vegetables I'm going to talk about. Now, there might be specific windows for individual vegetables in certain parts of South Texas. But in the end, I think this is just a good rule of thumb for master gardeners to know. And some of these vegetables will require fertility. Again, that primarily being nitrogen, but they also need phosphorus and potassium. So I will talk about these vegetables in terms of family. And the reason I discuss them in terms of family is because many of the same insects and diseases that attacked one member of the family attack the others. So they are kind of, one and the same. You can kind of think of them as cousins. So if, one cousin gets this particular kind of insect, you can expect it on the other cousin, or some kind of disease on one cousin, you can expect it on the other cousin. So if you're really trying to rotate within the garden or your area you're planting, if you plant cousins in the same place, you really didn't follow any rotation. They just happen to be different vegetables, but they're very much related. So the first family I'm going to discuss is the crucifer or the Brassicaceae family. Some people might call it the cabbage family. So these are all members of the cabbage family. Of course, we pretty much all know that cabbage, broccoli, and cauliflower are related. And I have below there, I have difficult to get size. So I have them as difficult to grow for someone that's beginning as a gardener. And that primary reason is because they're probably not watering it and fertilizing it enough to meet their expectations in terms of cabbage size, broccoli size, and cauliflower. If they did that, they would, they're relatively easy to grow. But ones that are even easier to grow because they don't have the high water requirements, high fertility requirements, is kale, kohlrabi, Brussels sprouts, collards, mustards, turnip greens, Brussels sprouts. I left out radish because most people don't realize that the radishes are in the cabbage family or in the Brassicaceae family. So, these cousins can look totally different. And oftentimes we don't realize they're related to one another. So many of the same insects that attack cabbage are the same insects that attack radish in your garden. So I recommend, the column where I talk about easy to grow, especially if you're doing community gardens, school gardens as part of y'all's projects. Start off with the easy stuff and then move up to the more difficult stuff. I'm just calling it difficult, not impossible. But often people, for example, start off with cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, and they call me and they say, well, why is the cabbage so small? Why is the cauliflower so small? I just tell them you didn't do the care that it needed to grow them. It was not a disease. It was not an insect. So that's just just the rule of thumbs that I use. So varieties, there's probably a variety list that you all have as master gardeners. These are a list of the varieties I'm going to be discussing, ones that I've tested, I'm familiar with, and I know they work in the Rio Grande Valley. I'm not going to say they work in the whole all parts of Texas, but I would say in South Texas they work well. For green cabbage, I really like Extreme Vantage. I like that variety because it is resistant to the black rot bacteria. And we often don't see black rot in South Texas because it hardly ever rains. But in 2016, 2017, we had very rainy winters, uh, and the black rot bacteria was tremendous. I mean, uh, I had growers tell me that, they probably made 10% of their normal crop uh, those in those particular years. Of course, tested different varieties, and we found this experimental variety that was very tolerant to it. Then it got the name Extreme Vantage. As gardeners, you can buy it, and meaning you can buy small packets of it. You'll At the end you'll have to hunt which seed companies might have it, but it is available to gardeners in small quantities. Blue Vantage is another green variety. It's very productive for us. Solid Blue 780 and Bravo are very good varieties that do well in South Texas. Red cabbage, Super Red 115, and Red Jewel are good varieties there. For broccoli, we have a Texas Superstar. That's Green Magic. Um, Seed is kind of difficult to find, but there's no doubt that it is a transplant. Matter of fact, I saw it in Tractor Supply, in our Tractor Supply in Harlingen. So it can be available as a transplant to plant Green Magic. And it is a Texas Superstar, meaning that it's been tested over the years in all parts of Texas and done well all over Texas. Other varieties that I like that do well is Marathon and Pac-Man. Now, one thing about the vegetable or gardening in the last 10 years has been color. Never seen so much color be available in so many different things. This slide basically made me think of that. Now we got this purple cauliflower. That variety is graffiti. Of course, we have the traditional white cauliflower variety. There would be snow crown, but we also have these broccoli cauliflower crosses that are called Romanesco, and they have this green triangular shape to them. So, we have now this grouping of cauliflower that has a lot of color that really didn't exist in the 1990s or early 2000s, available for gardeners. Collards, collard varieties, there are Georgia Southern, Champion, and Flash. Kale, again, color has come into place, and even unusual kale, just like that Romanesco cross cauliflower. Of course, we have the traditional kale. A variety there would be blue curl. That'd be the picture on the left. In the middle picture, you have like this a line or row of this reddish plant, and that is red kale. Variety there would be red boar. And then we have a new kale that's really emerged on the scene, I'd say in the last 10 to 12 years. And that's a lancenato kale or Tuscan type, dragon type. I remember when a grower first took me out to the field and he showed it to me, and he pretty much asked me, "What is that?" So, well, I don't know what that is. I've never really seen it. So he says, "That's kale." I said, "Well, it sure don't look like the kale I'm familiar with." So again, there's new varieties, uh, different types that come from different parts of the world, and that's all been that's available to gardeners now. Kohlrabi, of course, we've always had red kohlrabi forever. Variety there has been Colbury. The regular green variety has been winter as recommended varieties. Mustard greens, again, another, I've never really seen purple or red mustard greens. Till recently, the variety there would be Savannah. The traditional green types would be Florida broadleaf and Southern giant curled. Turnips, I guess turnips have really come a long way, primarily for their tops, for turnip greens, more so than for their root. You know, as a as a young child or in my youth, I remember turnips being on the kitchen table. There was never no turnip greens. There was always a turnip root. I kind of see that kind of fading. The turnip greens have really become more and more dominant. And there's actually a variety that has a very small root, and that variety is called all top because it's mostly the top part of the turnip. So if you want turnip greens only, that would a variety there would be all top. If you want the traditional root, a variety there would be purple top, white globe variety. Now, Brussels sprouts, of course, have been around a long time, but they've become more accessible to gardeners in terms of seed, smaller seed packets. Again, those are really unusual plant. The actual Brussels sprouts themselves grow on the stalk or stem of the plant. So it's, something you just kind of keep harvesting as the plant keeps growing up. Varieties there is Jade Cross and Royal Marvel for our area. And now radishes have also gone through, we've always, I did not include black radish because I think that's really the ugliest vegetable I've ever seen. I don't know who would eat a black radish, but their black radishes have been around a long time. But now we got all these unusually shaped radishes, like the picture on the upper left-hand side. I call them watermelon radishes, have this watermelon look, unusual shape. I don't want to say there's a lot of colors, but there's enough colors out there to make the radish kind of interesting. Of course, for myself, I'm more interested in the traditional radishes, like the picture on the right-hand side. And varieties there are Cherry Belle and Cherryette. Of course, very easy to grow. And another radish is you could call it an Asian radish, but its name is daikon. And variety there is summer cross. Again, it's something that's used in Asian dishes, not really known, to most Americans, and in my opinion. But one thing I do like about the daikon is if you do have school gardens, I would highly encourage you to have, of course, the regular radishes, but some daikon as well, because they grow so prolifically, so large, and so quickly. Remember going to a school garden in Stark County, and of course, I was invited to watch them observe them harvest their vegetables. And I remember one of the children pulling out the daikon and just raising it over his head like he'd won the grand champion, vegetable. He had the biggest vegetable, out there. So I think, there's places of growing, different kinds of vegetables, not necessarily to eat, but to really show, for example, whether community or schools, that there are many different things. And if I show a little tiny radish and hold that daikon up, and I say, these two are radishes, you just get these, amazement by the students or the school kids. So just to show the diversity of what this particular plant can have. Now, moving away from the cabbage family or the Brassicaceae, moving on to the next famous cool season plant family. Used to be the Chenopodiaceae family, goosefoot family, which is a weed, but now they've kind of lumped it into a new family. I don't want to get too caught up in it, but basically they lumped it into the pigweed family, which is that picture on the right-hand side. Maybe some of you are familiar with pigweed or amaranthus. It is a weed, can be found year round in South Texas, but a lot more prolific when it's warm in the warm season. Now, lamb's quarter is a weed that's prolific in South Texas, but more commonly found when it's cool. So I would say in the lamb's quarter is a Chenopodiaceae goosefoot plant. So I kind of find these next grouping of vegetables more similar to the lamb's quarter than I do to pigweed. But that's the new grouping now. And just so you're aware of it, but I'd like to say there's still the Chenopodiaceae family, or I'll say the lamb's quarter family. And members of the lamb's quarter family are beets. Of course, you want the traditional red beets. Red Ace is a good variety. If you look at the picture on the right-hand side, you see this golden beet. The variety there is touchtone gold. Again, colors, never had those type of colors. In addition, we got what I call these watermelon candy striped beets as well that are part red, part white. So a lot of different colors are definitely available even in beets. So that's more color that you can add in your garden and in your diet. Spinach. Spinach varieties there is Samish, Tyee, and Bloomsdale. I just want to remind you all, as master gardeners, Texas at one time was really known as a spinach producing state. Now California is our spinach producing state, but we can lay claim to spinach, at one time, because we have two Popeye statues in Crystal City, basically showing the importance of what once, spinach at one time was more important in a canned version, and now it's, more fresh. So that's kind of, gone away in terms of the marketing, but, Texas can really grow spinach and beets really well because just like lamb's quarter, they really love our alkaline soils. So they like a high pH. Beets love a high pH. Spinach loves a high pH, not a low pH, and so does Swiss chard. So these Swiss chard cousins, this lamb quarters cousin, they like similar soil types. So they grow really well in our natural soils with a high pH. Again, color, if you want color in your garden, and I highly recommend this variety. That variety is Bright Lights. It is super fluorescent. You can spot it a mile away. It is certainly something that draws students and the communities, folks, learning about gardening to come and explore or know more about Swiss chard. So if you want to really impress them with color and attraction, Bright Lights is a variety I recommend. Grows well. If you want the regular white ribbed variety, the standard Swiss chard that I guess people eat and prefer, that would be rhubarb chard and Ford Hook Giant. So that takes care of the lamb's quarter family. Now we'll move on to the umbelliferae family or the carrot family, another family that likes cool weather. Of course, carrots, parsley, cilantro, fennel, and dill are very easy to grow in a garden. I rank celery as difficult. And again, that difficulty is due that it requires 35 inches of water, where all these other things are requiring 20 inches of water. Basically, celery is requiring double the water that is going to need double the water than these other plants. Again, color and carrots. So now you can buy carrot packets that already come pre-mixed with a white carrot, a purple carrot, a yellow carrot, and of course, the orange carrot that we're all familiar with. So you can buy carrots that already have this pre-mix in there. Don't have a variety for them. There's not a variety. They just tell you that it's a mixture are these different colors. Again, if you want color in your garden, something to try. I myself have tried the purple haze carrot, which is that very dark purple carrot in the picture. Uh, I've utilized it. It's a very, in my opinion, a very good eating carrot, but don't put it in your soups or your caldos because that's the fastest or quickest way to make a Halloween soup or caldo because it is, I mean, when cutting those carrots, my fingers were getting the carrot juices and actually dying or leaving the purpling on my skin. And I didn't realize that would have such a strong effect on the caldo or soup that I was making that my wife was just totally disgusted and threw it out. And it is a carrot, tastes like carrot. It will just give you a different look. For the traditional orange carrots, varieties there are sugar snacks and bolero. And that bottom picture is basically, it's on a raised bed, basically to illustrate that if you want, carrots to make size, you got to give them space because the seed is so small and you are planting by hand. You could plant, 3 or 4 carrot seeds very close to each other. And that carrot, those roots will basically combine and really not grow well. So if you want a long, slender carrot, you need an individual plant that's, if you want a 1 inch diameter carrot, they got to be 1 inch from the next plant. You want a 2 inch diameter carrot, has to be 2 inches away from the next plant. You want a 3 inch diameter carrot, you got to plant it 3 inches apart. But just make sure you have a single plant and there's plenty of spacing. Parsley varieties there are plain Italian dark green, which is your plain or smooth leaf parsley. And now there is a curly parsley, super curly variety there is forest green, which is the picture on the bottom. Cilantro, another easy carrot family member to grow. Varieties there that we recommend is Santo and Calypso, mainly because they're not heat tolerant, but of the cilantro varieties, they would be the most tolerant to heat, meaning heat causes a flowering effect on cilantro. And we call that flowering effect bolting. So, we know our winters are still are cool, or, Labor Day to Valentine's Day, we are going to encounter 100-degree day weather. We know that in South Texas, and they're going to be perfectly cool. And some of those heating, those events during the cool season, during the wintertime, could create bolting or flowering in your cilantro. So these two varieties are the most tolerant to that. They're not immune to that. I've grown Santo and I've had early season bolting because it got hot, but they're better than the other varieties. And, it is flowering. You could let it flower, let it attract bees and other pollinators. But I will say that once it bolts or flowers, the flavor and texture of those leaves is very different compared to if it didn't bolt. And I've done the taste test with my wife because I've tried to, she's asked me, is there any cilantro in the garden? And I say yes. I walk out there and it's all flowered or bolted, but I still try to cut the best leaves on that particular bolted plant. I bring it in. She doesn't notice, the nice, I'll call it the fuzzy leaves that happen when the plant bolts. But you put it in your pico de gallo or something else that really has a different flavor that's noticeable and again gets thrown out. So that's happened to me as well. Now, dill and fennel, very easy to grow. Dill can be, I recommend it for school gardens because, everyone knows the dill smell, because of dill pickles. And so if you grow that out there in a school garden and you have the kids come up to it and you show them the smell, they instantly recognize it. It's dill pickle. So again, a little bit of dill can go a long ways. You don't, some people do grow dill for the seed as a condiment, so you can let it flower out and you can collect the seed. The seed is fairly large; it's not a small seed, so it's easy to collect. So you can also get the dill seed. I also recommend dill in school gardens, not only just for the illustrating the aroma of the dill, but also you also get a butterfly that lays an egg there, and you get these humongous, colorful caterpillars that actually go to a chrysalis, and you can the children can collect and put in a jar and watch the butterfly emerge. So there's other reasons besides growing vegetables and eating them. It can also be some aesthetic stuff, some increasing pollinators, increasing some of these other insects, some of these other beautiful butterflies that can be found in South Texas. The next family I want to cover, we've covered the cabbage family, the lamb's quarter family, the carrot family, the that we've covered those families. So now I'm going to cover the allium family, amaryllis family, or the onion family. And again, there I have onions, leeks, chives, and scallions is easy to grow in your garden. Have garlic is difficult. And actually, garlic is very easy to grow in your garden. What's difficult is most people have this image of that garlic, as in that picture, that they can collect their garlic from their garden and store it and eat it later. The problem with that is in our area, we have too much humidity. It is too humid. So basically, these fungal spores and fungi develop between the cloves of the garlic. So as you try to store it, they're basically already there, have enough moisture and humidity from the growing season that basically creates a decay, and your garlic quickly decays and does not store very well. But you can eat it fresh. We're going to consume it fresh. You can grow garlic, and it's easy to grow in your garden. You just can't have garlic to consume 3 to 6 months down the road. It's just not gonna. It's just not gonna cure right because of the humidity. Onions, of course, I would say one of the favorite vegetables to grow in the cool season in garden for our gardeners. Everybody wants to grow onions in their garden, and part of it is due basically to the Texas 1015, which was a variety that was released in the mid 1980s. That was known for its mildness. Some people call it sweet, but there's really no sugar. It's not as pungent. Very mild onion. At one time, so Texas 1015 kind of laid claim to these very mild onions coming from Texas, and at one time, basically the Texas 1015 variety was bought up by a company. They decided not to make it anymore, and now the Dixondale Farms in Crystal City, or I mean in Carrizo Springs, is continuing the variety. So you as gardeners, you can order transplants from Dixondale Farms and have the Texas 1015 onion growing in your garden. Now, very good onion variety grows large, easily. It's just a very, very good recommended variety. Now, you might see Texas Spring Sweet 1015 onions at your retail store. I can pretty much assure you that they are not the 1015 variety. That is just a marketing name for any onion variety grown in Texas, in South Texas, that meets a low pungency level. So if it meets that criteria, it can be marketed that way. So those onions that you see at the store are not Texas 1015. But as a gardener, you can still buy Texas, the variety Texas 1015 to plant in your garden. Leeks, again, leeks and onions kind of have a specific time frame of planting them by seeds, pretty much October, November. You really don't want to go beyond that unless you have transplants. And if you do, then you could go December through February. That's very similar for leeks. If you're kind of out of that window, can create problems in terms of, again, flowering or bolting, and for onions, developing a good bulb will not initiate bulb formation. So varieties for leeks, there are these smaller leeks called baby bunchy. That's the name of the variety. If you want a larger leek, then a variety there would be Lancelot. Chives and scallions, I did try to grow chives in the field, in the soil. And I realized that they're very slow growing. At first, I was keeping the weeds out by hand hoeing it. And over time, the weeds won and I didn't have any chives. So I've come to learn that best place to grow chives is in a pot in your garden. So they don't have because they're slow growing, and they won't have any competition from weeds is the best way to approach it. Variety there is green garlic. Scallions basically means bulbless bunching onions. We might refer to them as a green onion, so that would be a scallion, not to be confused with a shallot, which is a different type of onion that has kind of cloves or branches just like a garlic. So there's scallions and there's shallots. So shallots are kind of grown in a different area of the United States. Haven't had much experience with shallots, but I always get questions about shallots. But we can definitely grow scallions or green onions in our garden. So we're moving on to the next plant family. So moving away from the onion family, and the next family is the lettuce family. And basically there is, everybody wants to grow head lettuce, or whether it's romaine or iceberg. And those, again, prove to be kind of difficult to grow, kind of like the cilantro. You get a heat wave come in and they decide to bolt or flower. So you no longer have a head. You have this stem growing through the head, breaking it out and flowering. So my suggestion there is to grow leaf lettuce. They're not head lettuces. Pictures there are different types. They come in different leaf shapes, different leaf colors. So the leaf lettuce are very easy to grow. Again, the planting window that I mentioned, they really need cool weather. Because the seed is small and the type of plant that it is you do want to plant them in the soil, but you don't want to plant them too deep. You just want a very light layer of soil, so there's still some light penetration because they need light to germinate. And another trick that I use and many gardeners use is you get your lettuce seed, you refrigerate it for a couple of weeks before you plant it, so that coolness in that refrigerator of, we'll say, 40 degrees Fahrenheit is kind of a trigger for them to germinate and grow in your garden. Another member that would be a cousin to the lettuce is the dandelion. So the dandelion and the lettuce would be related cousins. They both like cool temperature. The picture on the right is the wild dandelion that you'll find, and it's edible. I don't recommend anybody to go eating wild dandelions unless they know what they're doing, because there's a lot of other plants that look like it. So when I was working with commercial growers, and they were, telling me they were growing dandelions. So I wanted to, of course, become more familiar and experiment with the dandelion because I do like eating dandelion in my salads. I kind of find out that they were not growing dandelion; they were actually growing a totally different species that's related, that's in the same family, but and is a cousin of the dandelion, but not a dandelion. And that was Italian chicory. And that's the picture on the left-hand side is a picture of the Italian chicory. It has this dandelion looking leaf. It's a little, I would say, more bitter, but this will be the dandelion that will be in your spring mix salad. That already mixed salad. They actually call it dandelion, but if there's no dandelion in the spring mix salad, it is this Italian chicory. Variety there is the Clio. You can get it, you can get it and grow it. So it is not, you will not find it as dandelion. You'll find it. It's Italian chicory. Obviously, some of us may know chicory from New Orleans and chicory coffee, but that'd be a wild chicory that they use the roots. So yes, there's a lot of chicories in the world, but this particular chicory is being used as a substitute as dandelion in your salads and actually sold as dandelion in the stores. So that brings us basically to the end of the warm season vegetables. I mean, of the cool season vegetables. I am not going to cover the warm season vegetables, but I will tell you that the warm season vegetables basically want the uh, warm time of the year, not the extremely hot time of the year. So that would mean planting from Valentine's Day to about Tax Day. And possibly in Nueces County, you might have a window there and the last day, the last of the dog days of summer to about the height of hurricane season to plant some of these warm season vegetables. So that would be all the other vegetables that go in your garden would fall under warm season. So I'm going to skip through all the warm season vegetables. We're going into the cool season. And for the sake of time, uh, maybe I'll just go, what are some warm season vegetables? Of course, some warm season vegetables would be the tomato family, nightshade family, tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, potatoes, tomatillo, eggplant, all your types of peppers, your beans, whether they're actual green beans or dry beans or even peas, southern peas, potted peas, edamame or edible soybean or jicama. There's a bean family that prefers warm season. The gourd family or the melon family, everything from cucumbers to watermelons to pumpkins and gourds. Um, the mallow family, which basically is your okra. And the reason I'm bringing that up is cotton is in the mallow family. So okra is a cousin to the cotton plant. And of course, sweet corn. Everybody wants that sweet corn in their garden. I won't cover that. But my last slide for the presentation will be your vegetable seed sources. So all these varieties that I mentioned, varieties that are in the Texas Master Gardener's Handbook, you have a list there, a list that maybe will come from Nueces County. Those varieties you're not going to find at your local nursery. You're certainly not going to find them at Walmart or any other place that you might source seeds. So you will have to do an internet search. At least the varieties I presented today are available, but they could come from different seed companies. There's Burpee, Harris Seeds, Mowing, Hummer, Johnny's, Landreth, Osborne. There's Park, Peaceful Valley, Roop, Stokes, Southern Exposure Seed Exchange, Territorial Seed Company, Totally Tomato, Willie Seeds, Wilhite Seeds. Now, these are just to name a few. But the good thing about a lot of these seed sources, of course, using the internet, you can track them down as to who has them. You can also call them up. You don't have to be on the computer. You can actually call their 1-800 number, order the seeds, get information, or you could go to their website and order the seeds that you might have an interest in. So I would say that as a master gardeners, be familiar with all the possible vegetable seed sources. For myself, I know I do a lot of business with Johnny's, with Osborne, with Stokes, with Twilly, with Wilhite. That's just kind of the ones I, get my vegetable seeds. But I just want you to know that you are going to have to hunt and find some of these varieties that are being recommended, and they're not going to be easily found in your local area for the most part. And with that, I'll be glad to take some questions in the next 10 to 15 minutes.
Y'all can unmute and ask questions.
Yeah, I know there's some questions in the chat box, but can you just go ahead and ask me your questions, those that have questions?
Somebody wanted to know the name of the grower for the onions, the 1015 onions.
Well, I can tell you this, that he's a fairly large grower. He markets them as they're organically certified grower, certified onions coming from the Rio Grande Valley. So he's not a small grower. Okay. So I don't know if there's relatives out there, so I don't want to name someone. But yes, he is still in business growing certified organic onions.
Okay. No, the 1015 starters.
Oh, the starters. Where do you get them?
Yeah.
You get them at Dixondale Farms.
Dixondale. Okay. He had Dixie yes. Bell. So.
Oh, yeah. Dixondale.
Thank you.
Uh-huh. Okay. Any other questions?
Somebody loves beets. Oh, they were talking about the plastic mulch, that it's sheeting, not shredded tires. It's actually an agricultural product.
Yes. And even the biodegradable one. Yeah. It is a I'd say like a paper, comes from wood.
Yeah.
So that is available. But just like paper, you have a big windstorm, big rainstorm, it just breaks apart. And that's part of the reason biodegradable plastics haven't made it, because they just get destroyed by the environment.
Too fast, yeah.
Yeah.
There's a question about the different colors showing up in the cole crops. Do you know how they obtain the colors?
Oh, that's a very good question, because a lot of people might think that they genetically manipulate them or they inject a dye. So all the vegetables that you eat, except because this is basically to address, whether vegetables genetically modified or they've done this DNA stuff. All the vegetables that you eat are not GMOs. They're not genetically modified organisms, except for possibly if you eat, and it has to be labeled, sweet corn. Sweet corn has been genetically modified to have a gene from the bacteria that produces the toxin that kills the corn earworm. Okay, but that has to be labeled. So that is one vegetable that is genetically modified. The other vegetable is your summer squashes, whether it's zucchini or yellow squash. But that one kind of flew under the radar, meaning how they did a genetic modification on squashes, the summer squashes, because the viruses that attacked those squashes was extremely bad. And so basically they gave it we'll call it a vaccination. So they introduced basically DNA material into the squash genome that produces the proteins of the viruses. Because of that, when a virus attacks those plants, it thinks it's okay, doesn't need to make any more, and it quits. So it stops the virus, it stops the disease. But that one flew under the radar, meaning it was more like a vaccination than a genetic. So getting back to the colors, none of the colors are genetically modified plants. They are just plants that had, a plant breeder found a selection, and a lot of these may come from the wild type plants, and made crosses and came up with these colors. But these crosses are the natural type of crosses, like we've been doing for hundreds of years in trying to develop new varieties. I hope I answered that question.
Oh yeah,
And,
absolutely. Yeah.
and then basically, I'm trying to say that all these colors, whether it's a purple carrot, a purple cauliflower, it was natural in the sense it was natural to the plant, and just man continued to make a selection for it.
Gotcha. The next question is, any advice on controlling squash vine borers?
Well, it's really a hard one, and it's really, really, really hard. I mean, my only suggestion is a man-made chemical, and even that doesn't work so well. So I really couldn't give you a good answer. Okay?
Gotcha. And one other question on the corn. She's wondering, is it possible to get corn that has not been genetically modified?
Okay, so let me be very specific on the corn. And I still haven't seen it at the retail stores, but I suspect that it's in some retail stores. So all the sweet corn you're going to eat is not genetically modified.
Right.
There are varieties that are genetically modified, but they must be labeled at the store, meaning that they've been modified. That's why I've never myself seen it. I'm just saying those varieties are available, and you can actually order them from Johnny's if you want to, Johnny's Seeds, if you want to grow them yourselves and consume them. But I would say that the American public, or the buyers, the retailers, have not jumped into that. They're not going to put that sweet corn on the on for sale at a store. So they're available. How much is it being grown? I would say not much, because the buyers at the HEB, they don't want it. They don't want the consumer being confused. So any sweet corn that you buy is not gonna have it, I would say. But it should be labeled. That is a labeling thing that should be available to say it's not. Okay.
That's the last of them. Thank you very much. Very informative.
All right. All right. If there's no further questions, hope you all have a great evening. And
Your presentation was terrific as always, so we appreciate it.
thank you, Kevin. Thank you. All right. Well, if you have any questions, you can holler at me, holler at Kevin, and wish you luck in your gardening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.